Hello friends, many have asked about Rick's and my recent trip to Israel. I will share with pictures. Hope you enjoy. After landing in Tel Aviv, Israel, we were express walked through customs because of our tour, and received a card in place of a stamp in our passports. We then boarded a tour bus as we took a short ride through the city to a nearby town called Netanya. Our first night's room was lovely and overlooked the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. We had an elaborate dinner with what seemed like hundreds of colorful dishes prepared buffet style: salads, meats, fish, chicken, breads, vegetables, and many desserts. The next morning after breakfast we boarded our bus with the tour group of 44 and headed for Caesarea National Park. Pastor Mike Atkins gave a talk in the ancient Hippodrome where Paul the Apostle would have talked to King Agrippa and others about the Messiah. This is an area on the Mediterranean Sea where they also held chariot races. On our trip to the Holy Land, we then went to Nazareth where Jesus grew up. A small beautiful town where he would have walked the streets with his brothers and played with friends. Unfortunately, also, a prophet is not recognized in his own town, and he was, in adulthood, threatened to be thrown off the Mount of Precipice by the local populace for claiming to be the Messiah. It was considered blasphemous. Journeying on our trip to the Holy Land, we checked into our Tiberias Hotel for dinner and overnight. The next day we explored the ruins of the synagogue in Capernaum, the center of Jesus' ministry in Galilee. We visited Magdala, where Mary Magdalene came from. This is a place of a remarkable recent excavation. A hotel was being built around 2006 and artifacts were uncovered of a well-preserved 1st century synagogue. This was, in the 1st century, an economic center for preserving fish to sell, and the priceless Magdala stone, that is now encased in a glass viewing box in the hotel, was found. This is a stone that was used to read the Torah from in the synagogue by the rabbi. It is believed that Jesus would have very likely used this stone when he read the Torah in the synagogue. The well-preserved tiles on the floor would very likely have heard the voice of Jesus. That afternoon we stood atop the Mount of the Beatitudes where Jesus would have delivered the Sermon on the Mount and fed the 5,000 the loaves and fishes. On our trip to the Holy Land we sailed on a boat in the Sea of Galilee where Jesus called some of his disciples to become fishers of men, and was reported by Matthew to have walked on the water. We saw a preserved fishing boat at that time and had a special fish dining experience for lunch at a wonderful restaurant called David's. We saw kibbutzes as we drove in the bus where young men served 3 years and women served 2 years, raise bananas, mangoes, and other crops as they serve in the army. We finished the day at the Jordan River where several people were baptized by Pastor Mike. Rick and I were formally baptized by Pastor Mike about 15 years ago in Jackson, Wyoming, where we live for 6.5 months of the year. We were baptized at River Crossing Church in Jackson, where there is a little creek and where Pastor Mike performed the ceremony in his waders, because even in August the water is chilly. At each site we visited, Pastor Mike would do what he is most gifted at, giving a spiritual talk that made the place we've heard about in the Bible come alive, both in its relevance in Jesus' life 2,000 years ago, and how the concepts are still relevant in our lives today. This is what I liked most about our tour. No one can talk in an inspiring, spirit-filled way like my Pastor Mike. These are ancient olive trees in the Garden of Gethsemane, dated to the time of Jesus. To me, Easter is about new beginnings. Golgotha is where Jesus was crucified and died, and the tomb where he was laid. 3 days later, on Easter, the stone was found to be rolled away, and he was no longer there. He transcended even death. On this special day, I wish for you the gifts of hope, faith, and the belief in new beginnings. We then journeyed south through Jordan toward the Dead Sea and rode the tram up to the top of the cliffs to the World UNESCO site called Masada, a fortress and humongous castle built by Herod the Great. It was a remarkable and well-preserved site that showed how they collected and conserved water in the desert environment in cisterns, looked out over encampments, and heated elaborate bathhouses, which the royalty spent hours in. We ended the day at the Dead Sea, where those who wanted to could float in the salt sea, 5 times more salty than the ocean, and experience the world-famous minerals and healing properties of the water. We visited the oasis in Ein Gedi, where we hiked to waterfalls and got to ride on camels. Here is some interesting historical info about Masada, sent at the request of a Jewish friend. David hid from King Saul in this area. David surely knew of its huge size and steep cliffs. During his hiding, David wrote, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress and my deliverer," Psalms 18 verse 2. In this psalm, he used the Hebrew word that literally means Masada, providing a fitting picture of the unshakable protection and strength of God. After the Roman legions destroyed the Second Temple, Masada, in Hebrew Horvat Mita, means ruins of Masada, an ancient mountaintop fortress in southeastern Israel. It was the site of the Jews' last stand against the Romans. It took the Roman army of almost 15,000, fighting a defending force of less than 1,000, including women and children, almost 2 years to subdue the fortress. It has become a symbol of freedom and resistance to godless tyranny. From my friend's point of view, as someone who reads military history, he says that Masada was the greatest siege in history. The full force of the Roman Empire at its peak, against a tiny band of people, including women and children. The Romans took 2 years to build an enormous giant ramp to the top of this mountain to crush this tiny country that dared to rebel, a chilling vision of what tyranny is. There was a mass suicide and destruction of Herod's works, because when the Romans got on top, they found nothing to loot, no people to sell as slaves, nothing to triumph over. They did not win. The war was over, but as a moral and courageous force, the Jews won. And it also teaches us what it means to fight for liberty, give me liberty, or give me death. On our trip to Israel, we visited the Jerusalem Museum in modern Jerusalem, where we saw a very large model of the Old Jerusalem and where we visited the exhibit of the historic Dead Sea Scrolls. We walked down the Palm Sunday path imagining shouts of Hosanna, as Jesus entered the city on Palm Sunday, and visited the olive tree-filled Garden of Gethsemane, where we reflected as Jesus did the night he was betrayed with a kiss. Shalom, peace be with you, Lily.